Hello and welcome to the program. This is the Black Ponderer. I'm the host of the channel, Neil Trotter. Hello, welcome. It's a dark, gloomy day here where I live. Rain, cloud cover. So, we don't got the best lighting. I got these few lights set up, but when is the lighting ever good on this channel? Not particularly any time really. But this is a lo-fi channel, as you may know if you've been around for a while. So, I don't care that much if you do. Well, we lo-fi here on the Black Ponderer. And today, we're going to be talking about a book that was sent to the Black Ponderer. It was a gift. And those are great. I love getting books from viewers and people who are just like to get my opinion on stuff. And that's very good. FYI, if you want the Black Ponderer to cover a particular book, there's several ways to do it. One of them is just sending it to me. Just send an email to me or comment below or just hit me up. Links all over the place. They're all listed somewhere on the channel. Check it out. But thank you, viewer, for viewers. I would consider a good friend of mine. They sent me this book. It's called Hospicing Modernity. And the subtitle is Facing Humanity's Wrongs and the Implications for Social Activism. Dang, that's a deep subtitle there. And it's by Vanessa Machado de Oliveira. not a Spanish speaker. Not a speaker of the romantic languages. So, I don't know. I think I got that right. Anyway. This is a very good book. I really did think this was an excellent read, and I'm glad that I was sent this book to talk about. It brings up a lot of important things. I guess the first thing is interesting because the first part of the book talks about, hey, you may or may not want to read this book because it might be a bit too much in terms of the content, which we'll go into. The book is about thinking about like the modern age, like the modern era, modernity, right? Modernity. It is about the way we live today in this modern era is not gonna save us. It's not, we think like, the way we live today, the modern era, and we'll go into like what modernity actually means from the words in the book. But it's this idea that, the way that we are living today is not working out for us, and is really just leading us to oblivion, honestly. And a lot of people aren't ready to hear that. And author specifically says, like, if you're not ready to hear that, you might want to like pause, maybe think about it before you start reading this book, because it might be heavy. I agree, it's pretty heavy, and we'll get into that. So the main idea is hospicing, now that the current way that we're living today is kind of on its death throes. It's like, it's dying. The way we're currently living, and we're talking about Westernization, Western civilization, quote unquote. The digital age, the super hyper capitalist society, right? It's not looking good for us, despite the fact that this way of life has given us some good things, right? But it's also given us a lot of bad things, and often we want to put the blinders on with the bad things and just focus on the good, and not understanding that the bad things are actually destroying us, right? So it's about coming to terms with the fact that, hey, it ain't working out for us, and we need to figure out another way to live, right? Now, another thing that's difficult about this book is you might respond like, okay, wise guy, what is a better way to live? And the book doesn't give you an answer, which is, some people might feel frustrating. They're like, you're saying all this, you're critiquing the modern era, but you have no answers. But what the book does, which is really cool, is it primes you. It's like, well, that's up to you. You need to answer that question for yourself. I'm just helping you come to terms with the fact that it ain't working. It's like, what is it? Overcoming denial is the first step to recovery. This is about overcoming the denial, right? And coming to terms with the fact that, this way of life is not working for us. And I kind of appreciate that approach. It's like, I'm not giving you answers to like how should we live. Instead, I'm just giving you the groundwork and the foundation to just accept like this ain't working out. Now that you're primed to like hospice modernity, right? Now you're ready. Go be the change you want to be, type of thing, right? And this book is kind of written like a self-help book in a way, which is not a slight to the book. Some of the best books I've ever read are self-help books, right? But there's some really good self-help books out there. I'll tell you something. Just the same level as some of the deepest philosophical treatises out there, right? And so this book has a lot of exercises in it. A lot of exercises about like thought experiments and even just like, physical activities you could do, right? To prime you to this kind of disposition, this mode of thinking, this like getting you ready to hospice modernity. All right, so this book takes a long time to get through, I would argue. If you really like give the book its due, like if you really are like, okay, I'm really gonna give this book a go and give it an honest chance and see what this book has to offer, it's gonna take you a while. So I know the person sent me this book to talk about, my buddy, but it took a while because this book takes a long time to get through. Not necessarily because it's dense, but because of the exercises and just the way that it forces you to reflect on current society and how like it's not working out the way that our society wants you to think it's working out, right? Anyway, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna go read some quotes in the book, because that's what we do here at the Black Ponderer. We read quotes, right, we read the actual text in the book, and then I just give my supplementary commentary about themes that I thought are interesting. Then I open up the discussion via comment section below. Feel free to comment and go back and forth with me or not. All good. So first and foremost, we're gonna explain what the book means by modernity. You might have heard that word before, but how does the author talk about that mode of being, right? So I'll read you page 16. This is the third paragraph, third line. The way modernity is addressed in this book is somewhat unconventional. Modernity is a who rather than a what. It is presented as a multifaceted, living entity. In this sense, modernity is not a concept, label, or object of analysis. Rather, it is a worlding story, a complex, adaptive living system that actively does things, including conditioning the habits of knowing and being of those whose lives and livelihoods are intertwined with it. So there's a few things, right? That's why this book can be a bit difficult, because it's forcing you to think in ways that are not how we're brought up traditionally in the Western world. It's not trying to define, right? It's not trying to define. It's more so trying to get you to acknowledge the complexities of like the interrelations of reality, right? So it's not so much analyzing what modern society is. It's trying to get you to understand how you relate to the way society is set up in this modern framework, right? It's about like looking at your relationship with society, the land, the earth, technology, social institutions. Is more so trying to get you to observe, to awaken, right? To be aware, to trying to build your awareness. Okay, this is page 17, and this is the second to last paragraph, last sentence. Some believe a generally new system is only possible if we are able to learn the lessons that modernity has to offer in its decline. This book resonates with this latter position. Its intention is not to provide a synthesis of stories already told, but to offer different stories that can help us take a step back. This allows us to develop the dispositions to be taught by modernity itself, with honesty about its flaws and gifts, without trying to defend it, fix it, or prematurely replace it. In this sense, modernity is not a corrupt project of the West that needs to be defeated and replaced with a more righteous and virtuous non-Western alternative, but rather something that is now unevenly part of all of us, conditioning the ways we experience reality. The educational stories of modernity presented here do not seek to put modernity in a box as an object, or to describe it objectively and universally, or to prescribe what exactly you should do with it. Instead, the stories seek to move us to experience and observe manifestations of modernity and ourselves within it differently, with more sobriety, maturity, discernment, and accountability. This is crucial if we want to repair relations to make better informed and more responsible choices as we face the storms ahead of us with more humility, honesty, humor, and hyper self-reflexivity. So yeah, that was a much more eloquently stated way of what I just said before I read that last part. The book is trying to help you confront the dying of the way that we are currently living. Like, the way we're currently living is just not working out the way we think it should, or the way we've been taught to believe it should, right? It's not working out, and that's a hard reality to face. So it's he's just letting you get ready for that. It's like, hey, it's not looking too good. Here's why it's not looking too good. And here's how you can be ready for that. You know, some people look at the world today, they turn on the news and they're like, oh God, it's so horrible. And then they get kind of frozen or kind of like trapped in despair and angst, where the book is like, okay, let's get you out of that trap. I'm not going to give you answers. I'm just going to counsel you or console you so that you can just confront the angst and the sadness of it all, and kind of work through it, not necessarily overcome it, but kind of work with it so you can be ready to go to the next thing, right? So like, all right, now that we know this isn't working out, I'm gonna get you ready so you can go out there and do something else. But let's talk more about how this book approaches modernity and like describes it and talks about it by reading another quote. This is page 18. This is the third paragraph here, second line. I have often referred to modernity as modernity/coloniality. The term functions as a reminder that the benefits we associate with modernity are created and maintained by historical, systemic, and ongoing processes that are inherently violent and unsustainable. In other words, this term underscores the fact that modernity cannot exist without expropriation, extraction, exploitation, militarization, dispossession, destitution, genocides, and ecocides. I mean, you know, you turn on the news today and you're gonna see every one of these things, right? You're gonna see you're gonna see every single one of these things that were just listed here. You're gonna see it, right? And this is the modern society that we live in. And this is what the modern society is built off of, these things, is what the author is saying. This is substantiated by economic, political, and historical data. But like crime is crisis data, this data is deemed too hard to deal with and largely ignored or reframed as something else. The author is listing all of these issues, and then you tell somebody that and they don't want to hear it. They're like, I'm not trying to hear that. I'm only focusing on the good stuff that modernity brings, and they're ignoring all the bad stuff. And it's like, it's too hard to deal with. But the book is like trying to get you to overcome that it's too hard to deal with reaction. It's like, no, you have to deal with these things if you want the human species to survive through this, right? Is what, or like move on past this destruction that modernity is doing to us and to like our environment and so forth. So really the book is trying to change you from saying this is too hard to deal with to this is hard to deal with, but it's not too hard. Right? We're gonna deal with it. Although it's hard, we're gonna deal with it, right? That's kind of the whole crux of the book. This is page 19. third paragraph, seventh line. The term also draws attention to the fact that conquest is the driving force of modernity and coloniality. The colonial desires to discover, to conquer, occupy, own, rule, and control propel modernity forward. Yep. And I skipped 2 lines here. While most critics of modernity coloniality associate colonialism with the expansionist occupation of lands and the subjugation of peoples, many indigenous peoples see these manifestations of violence as symptoms of a deeper and older form of violence that happens at ontological and metaphysical realms, the realms of being. I'm making these air quotes because that's the air quotes in the book. This deeper, older violence is the imposed sense of separation between ourselves and the dynamic living land, metabolism, that is, the planet and beyond, as well as the theological separation between creature and creator. This imposed sense of separation or separability is based on human exceptionalism, the idea that humans are a superior species that deserve to conquer, dominate, own, manage, and control the natural environment. Human exceptionalism is also the basis of anthropocentrism, which places humans at the center of and as the most important entities in the world. Human exceptionalism and anthropocentrism have often been justified on the grounds of the human capacity to reason, understood as the capacity to consciously make sense of reality and to apply logic in order to adopt and justify decisions. Right? So that's a big theme here in the Black Ponderer. One of the major points of this channel. Like if you maybe watch videos of me talking, of the Black Ponderer videos, you'll start seeing the theme of, human beings are radically interdependent or dependent on each other. Independence is an illusion, is a lie. Nobody's really independent, right? We all rely on each other. Not only do we rely on other humans, we rely on other living beings. But not only do we rely on other living beings, we rely on a myriad of non-living beings, right? A lot of non-living entities. In a sense, reality is this ecology of like interrelation, right? And the problem with modern society is that it ignores this fact, and it doesn't just ignore it, it rejects that notion. It tells you that the radical dependence is a lie. Like, no, you are an individual that can just stand on your own 2 feet. You need to just pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, and it's a dog-eat-dog world, and life is a zero-sum game, and all this kind of BS, right? And we've created all this logic, and that's kind of what modernity is, right? It's this logic of living in this like lie that like independence is the ultimate reality, where like that's actually not the case at all. And this idea of like human exceptionalism that the book talks about is not really a thing. Human beings are not exceptional, right? Relative to other forms of life or even like non-living entities. Like we're kind of all special in our own ways, but also it's kind of hard to separate like the human being from other entities in reality, right? We're kind of all meshed together, intertwined, right? We're so intertwined together that, separating ourselves from other aspects of reality is kind of foolhardy, but modernity pushes us to emphasize that separation, which is the problem. So ultimately, that's basically what modernity is. That's kind of like how I'm describing it, right? And so like that way of thinking about the world is really destroying us as a species. Like it's like it's dehumanizing us. I use the word dehumanize. I would go kind of more broadly. It's like de-existing us, right? It's like we're separating ourselves from the actual existence that is reality, right? We're living in this false realm that we've kind of created based off of modernity, and it's like leading us astray. Literally, like astray meaning is leading us to death, right? So we gotta go away from that. All right, let me read you this quote on page 25. It's the second paragraph. Modernity predetermines what can be heard, what can be deemed real and possible, what can be imagined as desirable and ideal, and how we are supposed to feel, behave, and communicate within these parameters. This conditioning is precognitive. It is faster than thought itself as it structures our unconscious. And I've talked about this in other videos. This is referred to by many terms. One term that comes to my mind is the capitalist imaginary, where capitalism literally restricts how people think about things. You know, for example, you'll bring up like, you know, maybe we should have free healthcare. Healthcare should be free. And, you know, a ton of people will just jump on the bandwagon and be like, well, that's impossible. You can't, there's nothing that's free in the world, right? There's nothing, you know, that would not work. And then they'll start like citing all these examples of how it doesn't work. But these examples, like look at Canada, for instance, they have free healthcare, but they gotta wait like many months or whatever for the healthcare, and then they'll cite other capitalist countries, right? They'll do that. And it's like, well, yeah, because you're limiting your imagination off of all that you are experienced. But there's all these possibilities that are actually outside of your experience or are yet to happen, right? Or actually have happened. But we've kind of erased those ways of being through like cultural erasure, and you know the modernity / colonialism has kind of factored that out of our imagination. So we're unable to think outside of these frames of being, and that's another problem with modernity. So that's the book is trying to get you to understand. Like, first of all, you got to like expand your imagination. You got to be able to think outside of frames of modernist, I don't know, I think when I say modernist, that might be a different term, but modern ways of thinking, like thinking outside of capitalism, thinking outside of patriarchy, thinking outside of Westernization. And the book even mentions modern society has put us in such a place where it's almost impossible, or the way we're living today, it is impossible for us to think outside these frames of being. So example of the free healthcare, for instance, there's people out there who are saying like, we should have free healthcare, right? We should have free healthcare. But the book argues like, well, yes, we should, but it's impossible for us to have free healthcare in our current society that we exist in today. This modern society has to first die. And then after it's dead, then we can start thinking about free healthcare. So the book argues like before you can even implement these ideas that you're imagining, you know, like free education, free healthcare, abolition is another radical concept, like a world without police or prisons. That just can't happen in the world we live in today. We have to like let the world that we live in today die first in terms of like modern society, then these things can happen, right? Right. So that's kind of the point of the book. It's like we have to hospice modernity first, then we can start thinking about all these radically new ways of being that are more conducive to the actual reality of our radical dependence on each other. So let me read you this quote. This is page 30. This is third paragraph, fifth line. It may be useful to evoke a distinction between problems, things that can actually or potentially be fixed, and predicaments, things that must constantly be dealt with, won't be solved, and won't go away. There's also a difference between something complicated that can be sorted with careful planning or engineering, e.g. a long car trip with toddlers, and something complex that is moving, multidimensional, and largely unruly, unmanageable, and unpredictable, e.g. raising children. Right? So that's a good distinction right there. There's we don't, in our current modern society, we don't separate these two things. We are these different conditions. Right? It's hard for us to make this distinction. Modernity has this belief that all problems can be solved, right? And modernity also leads us to believe that every situation, no matter how complex, can be reduced to something simple. And we got to get out of those frames of thinking before we can start living in ways that are actually conducive to human prosperity. Let me continue. Modernity's violence and unsustainability are usually interpreted within modernity as complicated problems that can be solved rather than complex predicaments that need to be confronted. This prevalent pattern of addressing the violence and unsustainability of modernity as complicated problems has major real-life implications. For example, a substantial amount of time and resources are invested in addressing the symptoms of violence and unsustainability rather than their root causes. And even when we look at the root causes, we try to manage them as problems rather than engage with them as complex predicaments. Yeah, and I would, so I like this book because it really hits home some of the themes of the Black Ponderer. Oftentimes people will argue with me because I've done books on like Marx and socialism, and they're like, oh, you're against capitalism. Yes, but the thing with me is like there's this hyperfixation on capitalism. This is an example I'm using, right, that's addressing these. People believe, and this is I kind of feel strongly about this, where people believe like, oh, once capitalism is toppled, then society will be fixed, right? like it's that simple. Now I understand, like they're not saying is that like the toppling of capitalism is not something that's simple. They acknowledge like Marxists or like others, people who are really into socialism, and socialism, thumbs up for me, good. Capitalism, mostly bad. Not like a cheerleader for capitalism here, but I will say that the capitalism is a result of a predicament, this human propensity for greed, right? And human beings are always gonna deal with this, with this problem of like this desire to exploit, become prosperous at the expense of somebody else. That's just a predicament that human beings are always going to be in, right? It's part of the human condition. It's beyond human condition. It's just part of the reality of existence, right? You look at other forms of existence, they're going back and forth too. Now, also, there's a lot of, at the same time, I say that existence is radically independent and we're constantly giving and taking. But there's also this reality of like some takes more than others, and there's this conundrum. The book talks about this. There's paradoxes that happen. There's contradictions that occur that are unresolvable, right? So I bring all that up because I feel sometimes with using the capitalism versus socialism example, whereas this idea that we can solve this problem of like human exploitation of other humans and creating large amounts of wealth for some. At the expense of many other people. The idea that you can just fix that by like installing the perfect social economic system and like everything will just fall into place like that's a condition of modernity, right? That's what the book argues. It's like you got to think beyond that. This is what I would say, and I agree with the book. Yes, like anti-capitalism, great, but it isn't just this one and done thing, right? It's this constant struggle. Right? And you might have to be going back and forth between like socialism, as it doesn't have all the answers as well. So you incorporate other modes of thinking and other ideas like anarchist type of thinking and other kinds of political philosophical ideas, and you continue to work on it. And that's what this book is referring to. And let's talk about like the goal of this book, right? This is page 36. This is the second bullet point. The book says that modernity has encouraged us to create narcissistic delusions about our sense of self-importance and our perceived entitlements, keeping us in a fragile and immature state that leaves us unequipped to face the challenges of our time, right? And that's true. Modernity kind of has done that with us, and particularly like, you know, I would say kind of it's really gone to extreme measures with like social media, where social media literally makes us like kind of like all celebrities, right? And like it allows us to create these images of ourselves, and then when those images of ourselves are challenged, we kind of buckle down and just kind of break into this existential crisis. And then we create these echo chambers, and then when other ideas come at us that challenge the echo chambers, we just don't know how to deal with them, and so we just start like yelling at each other and throwing stones at each other. It's, we've been reduced to this really immature way of living, right, of being. And here's page 37. This is the 8th line. The author says, I care deeply about our collective capacity to dig deeper and to relate wider. In order to make possible deeper engagements and better relationships, we will need to recreate capacities for sensing, relating, and imagining that have been deactivated within modernity. This does not require you to abandon convictions, just the arrogance, indifference, and contempt that modernity has implanted in all of us. Right, so that's what the book's trying to do. And I would say, it kind of does a pretty good job to start that process. So how then should we hospice modernity? How should we deal with modernity in its death throes? Right? How do we help it die? This is page 43, last paragraph, second line, depth education. This is defined as a mode of engagement designed to prompt us to dig deeper and to relate wider, disinvest in harmful desires, activate accountability and responsibility before will, not as an intellectual choice or a transactional calculation, and become open to being taught by the world in unexpected ways. Depth education focuses on complexities and paradoxes, and it invites all of us to sit with difficulties, unpack investments, confront resistance, disarm affective landmines, relate beyond meaning, identity, and understanding, rationally explore the limits of rationality, and face humanity within and around us in all its complexity, the good, the bad, the broken, and the messed up. When effectively mobilized, depth education feels disarming, scales down the importance of the ego, and expands possibilities for relationships. All right, then the author juxtaposes depth education, which is what is promoted, with mastery education, which is what modernity promotes. So I'm just continuing the quotes where I left off. If mastery education can be associated with the filling of a cup, depth education is about transforming the cup into an onion and allowing ourselves to experience the pain and joy of peeling its layers. While contemporary mastery education encourages learners to voice their opinions, aspirations, likes and dislikes, depth education encourages learners to step back to observe with skepticism one's own personal narratives, desires, and identifications and disidentifications. While mastery education instigates the performance of learners' identities and self-expression, depth education assumes that we are unreliable narrators of our own experiences and invites an inquiry into the ways we could be stuck, what we resist or try to run away from, and how different modes of knowing and being mobilize different relations, possibilities, and transformations in the world. Talking about the limits of our understanding, right? Even the understandings of ourselves, of our own experience. There's even a limit to that, right? And it's to acknowledge that and approach life with the understanding that, okay, we're not going to know everything, and there's things in life that happen that are beyond comprehension, right? and we need to be okay with that. And rather than trying to define everything, we just accept the complexities and the bad and the good of the world and try to work with it the best we can in relation with each other, right? In a productive, conducive, progressive way, right? So there's the juxtaposition, right? The obsession with defining and trying to solve problems and trying to make the complex simple, as opposed to leaving some things undefined, right? And being okay with that, recognizing that problems will always exist, right? And just being able to deal and mitigate and ride with the problem in the best possible way we can, rather than like try to solve it. And also, like, some things are just complicated and they will always be complicated, and you can't simplify everything, right? And some of the most important things, or the predicaments that we're in, are complex, and that's just how we have to deal with these situations. We have to deal with the complexity. I continue here. This is page 45, third line. Stories are not human-made tools of communication that aim to index the world into language or to word the world. Instead, stories are entities that visit and move things in the world in non-linear time. They are stories that world the world, like world building. Okay, so this is the way that the author approaches storytelling and encourages us to approach storytelling. The stories aren't trying to define reality. They're just trying to expand upon reality. They're trying to world build within the world that's already exists. Okay, same page here, page 45. This is the last paragraph. Instead of, is this story true? Or what does this story mean? Questions that come from the expectations that stories will describe reality and convey a fixed meaning. The approach of storytelling illustrated here invites us to ask, what is this story trying to move? And what does it do over time and to time itself? The story of the small sentient being at a very basic level may be trying to move us into a more respectful relationship with the land, with forests, and with other forms of life. The evocation of unseen manifestations of reality, i.e. the little people, and the author's referring to folk stories. What's brought up are folk stories from indigenous cultures, but I mean, these folk stories have been around in many cultures, basically all cultures. They have these like little people, like the fae or the fairies or the little gnomes, and they're like doing these things in mysterious ways. And what does it mean? But we often ask. But the author's like, well, don't ask those questions. Instead, do these things instead, right? The little people being able to turn thoughts foggy by tapping unconscious forms of communication may move us to consider how we are related and accountable to what is unknowable, things that are not visible or imaginable within and around us. The emphasis on the request for permission and the need for offerings may move us to consider a practice of consent, trust, respect, reciprocity, and accountability. And the author's talking about how, you have the little mythical creatures, and then you might offer like a token of gratitude. You might put it next to a tree. In the way that the old cultures would do things, which we've kind of lost in our modern society. Walk the forest, but then all these spooky things would happen and they would scare us, and so like, oh, must be the little people. Let me like offer a little token of appreciation so they don't mess with me, or like they'll take care of me. And the argument is like, well, that doesn't really exist. What's happening is the fog is moisturizing the plants, and then they make the branches vibrate in certain ways, and that's what's happening. It's science. Science can explain. But the author is saying, well, you're missing the point. The point is that you should be grateful for your relationship with nature, and you should be okay with not understanding everything that's going on, right? And just be able to just move through the world without understanding everything, and just kind of trust that nature is doing things that are conducive to your existence that that are beyond you, which is true. Right? That's the thing that's happening. And that's what the story really is about. Right? But let me continue to quote. By requesting reverence toward non-human beings occupying a position of authority as forest custodians, the story may direct us to decenter ourselves as humans from the center of the world, to shed our arrogance and to approach the land from a place of humility. If the story is retold several times, its power to land in our bodies and to move things expands. And I just skipped a paragraph here. Worlding stories are not trying to index reality in language to arrive at a perfectly secure place of description or prescription, or to wrap the world with a single heavy blanket of interpretation. They do not emerge from a Cartesian cogito ergo sum. That Latin. I don't know Latin, I'm sorry. I think therefore I am, or I say therefore it is. They are not trying to make sense of things in order to convey or confer mastery, authority, or control. And their intention is not to win or to conquer a debate. Worlding stories are not focused on the aesthetic perfection of form, but on the integration of form and movement. They are not supposed to be thought about, but thought, felt, and danced with and through. The play with ambivalence and dynamic force of meaning. In this sense, meaning will change as a worlding story lands deeper into the body. A story will have many layers of changing meaning, and some layers will only reveal themselves years after the story arrives. Worlding stories invite us to experiment with a different relationship between language and reality. These stories do not require anyone to believe in anything. Rather, they invite you to believe with them. However, these stories cannot work on you without your consent. Taking worlding stories seriously makes possible a significant change in your ways of seeing, sensing, and relating to the world. Right? So let's think about that example with the little gnomes or the fair. We're in a forest, and you're told like, oh, the fairies and the little gnomes, they like move stuff around, and they might actually accidentally trip you over or something if you make sure that you appreciate them. Give them a little token. Give them a little something to like make sure that they don't mess with you, because then they'll have your back. Right? Many cultures have given a version of this story in their environments, right? And then the author is saying like, we should go back to those kinds of stories. And you get the counter might be like, well, fairies don't actually exist, but the author is like, that's not the point. The point is like, you just go along with, just be like, okay, yeah, because the idea is you're respecting nature, like what I was saying before, and like you're accepting that there's gonna be things that happen in your journey you're not gonna be able to understand, and you shouldn't really be obsessed with just trying to understand everything. You should just move along with your journey, appreciating nature and like respecting nature despite you not understanding, and maybe you give a token of appreciation just to give off the sentiment like, well, thank you, nature. Thank you, like mysterious forces that I don't understand. You don't have to actually believe in fairies and gnomes. It's just like you just rolling with it. You just for the vibes, as they say today, right? That's what the author is getting at. Okay, but we're on page 47 now. This is the fourth to the last line. This investment in coherence and self-transparency grounded in a supposedly universal and objective view of reality severely limits our capacity to face and address plurality, uncertainty, ambiguity, and unknowability, both within ourselves and in the world at large. If we can't operate in the world without being able to not understand everything, if we can't function without having answers to all problems, then we are doomed. And that's kind of how we're living today. A big reason why we're in this mess of life now, human life, is we're like obsessed with like, I need to understand everything. Please give me the answers. And the author argues like, well, that's modernity that's done that to you. And we got to move past that. We got to let that die. And this is page 48, the third to the last line of the first paragraph. If we cannot hold space for the complexities within us, there is no chance for us to hold space for the complexities around us. So The author's even saying like, look, man, there's all this stuff in you that's contradictions and paradoxes, and like, you know, mentally, physically, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, there's things that are going on in you that you're unable to understand. And if you can't even confront that within yourself, how can you possibly be able to do that with others and with the world at large, right? But modernity forces us to like, no, you are this. Why you're doing this is because of this. And we're going to tell you a story because all stories have a moral at the end. And you're supposed to learn, and it's supposed to help you define reality. But no, like the author said, we got to get past that. Now check this out. This is page 82, second paragraph, third line. The urgency to move forward with the program of modernity prevents people from sitting with the ways modernity paradoxically creates the problems it tries to address, and motivates people to seek simplistic solutions, to treat the symptoms rather than address the much more complex systemic causes of poverty. This includes the fact that those in position to dispense help benefit from what creates poverty and are complicit in modernity's continuous violence and unsustainability. So now we're talking about charity versus like mutual aid work, right? Or like harm reduction work. Where charity is like, okay, you know, you see a homeless person, you give them some change in your pocket, or give them a food. We'll do a food drive. We'll give them homeless people the food, and then that's it. We're done. As opposed to like, well, why are these people homeless in the first place? Like, why is there homelessness? Hey, and then force yourself to really think through that. Modernity is like, well, don't think about that. Don't think about it. You just do, you know, focus on yourself. And then if you have time, then you worry about the people, because it's not your fault. Where, you know, actually it is your fault. You are complicit in, you know, you don't want to hear that because that's too hard to deal with, right? But I mean, this book is arguing like, well, no, you need to confront that reality, right? You are complicit in the reason why this person is homeless, right? You know, you hear that and then you're like, well, I'm done. I'm not reading this book anymore. But the truth hurts, right? But here's page 84, second paragraph. In education, we tend not to talk about the hidden violence and costs of the promises of the current system because it is neither easy nor convenient to do so. Talking about it is uncomfortable and frustrating, can prompt feelings of hopelessness and anger, can make us look in the mirror and see something we don't want to see, and can make us enjoy less the things that are pleasurable if we don't think about where they come from and at what and whose expense. Indeed, if given a choice, many people would choose to continue not to think about these things and to keep enjoying these pleasures and comforts uninterrupted. However, when these pleasures and comforts may be affecting the very possibility of the continuity of life on the planet, which is, we're at that point now, we need to consider our responsibility toward future generations of human and non-human lives. You drive your big gas guzzling Ford F-150, right? Or these big ass trucks that guzzles gas. You're like, yeah, you know, this is. I feel like I'm in the military. Big ass truck. I feel like I'm a rancher. You know, but that, you know, how much CO2 is being dumped into the environment, that's gonna affect your children and grandchildren as they live in a warmer environment where there's more climate disasters that are happening. Well, I'm not trying to think about that. I just want to drive my Ford F-150. That's what the book's trying to get you. And I can bring up many examples like that, right? Let me read you this quote. This is page 87. This is the fifth line of that page, right? The tendency to speak as if their theory of change is universally relevant and adapted by everyone in the room, and to assume that the terms and definitions they use will be interpreted and used in the same way by other people. Okay, so this is another important issue. Modernity has trapped us in this idea that, you know, our theory about the world is the theory, and that's from all different flavors of ideologies. You know, you say the right or the left, conservative, liberal, whatever, center, you know, outside of all that, you know, abolition. That's number one. You know, even when we talk about the left, even things that I talk about, right? are like, it's all about communism. That has to be the reason. No, capitalism. Capitalism is the ultimate end all be all. No, it's Christianity. No, Buddhism. No, Hinduism. Right? No, it's Islam. Right? No, it's atheism. Atheism is the ultimate end all be all. No, it's, you can just keep going. And modernity has trapped us into this thinking that, oh, if I just find a perfect philosophy or system of thinking, then that's the right one. And everybody else, if only they just adopted this way of thinking, everybody would be good. But actually, reality isn't like that, right? Reality is so complex, right? That any system of or way of thinking that human beings create is not going to cover all aspects of life, right? Or like ways of being, right? And we're going to have to be multifaceted in our ways of thinking. This tends to cause confusion and sometimes unnecessary conflicts. A simple educational intervention is to raise awareness of how language is ambivalent, how our interpretations are grounded in cultural reference that are not universally shared, and how the desire to word the world prevents us from acknowledging that words cannot index reality in a permanent way. This realization can go a long way in inviting people to speak with relational rigor in more tentative and self-reflexive ways. And I'm down for that. I'm a philosophy channel, the Black Ponderer, but I too could fall into the trap of like, oh, if they just thought this way, then the whole world would be good. And then you create this complex philosophical system, and it's like, I wish everybody would be a Hegelian. Oh no, people need to be Platonic thinker. Why can't everybody just be feminist? Feminism, but not, radical black feminism. That's what it has to be, right? But the truth is, you don't want to fall into that trap too, right? Of course, like, get the ideas that are good from many different places, right? And then even that might not be the correct way of doing things. I always got to be open to ambivalence and like kind of push back against trying to word the world, trying to index reality, because it's the indexes are constantly changing, right? Okay, I read you this quote, page 113. This is the third paragraph. As our attempts to salvage modernity by fixing or replacing it fail, there is a possibility that we will become disenchanted and disillusioned with modernity's promises in a generative way. This is the point where colonial desires can be reoriented uncoercively towards something outside our realm of intelligibility, and hence deemed impossible within modernity's walls. As we start to disidentify with the promises of modernity and to disinvest from modernity structures of being, not just of knowing, we may find the time and the vitality to be taught by modernity's dying, and assist in the death process with attention, discernment, and integrity. So here the author is saying, like, look, even in failure, we might succeed. Right? Once we try to bring modernity back, like, no, only AI. Let's do AI. AI is the answer. And then we keep failing with AI. It's like, with Grok and it's Mecha Hitler, right? What? I thought there was AI. Oh no, we just got to keep going. That's wrong. And we need to, and then we start to realize like, maybe this AI thing is just not working. or maybe we should put all our eggs in that basket, right? And then we start realizing, well, maybe we can work, AI could work with, but we just gotta not give it full reign, right? Keep it in check, right? Not create like enormous databases that destroy environments, right? Which, I have one of those we have one of those in the city where I'm at, right? Maybe we don't need AI to keep constantly be indexing. Actually, AI is a perfect example of like how indexing all of reality doesn't work, right? It just doesn't work because, meanings and interpretations and understandings of ways of being and modes of existence are constantly changing, right? And, and some things just cannot be indexed, right? So, of course, AI is gonna like regurgitate something that just doesn't make any sense at a certain point. It can't know all of reality correctly using that method. But maybe as we fail, you know, now it's just an example, we can begin to realize, okay, maybe we need to be doing something different. And we can reorient ourselves in more fruitful and constructive ways. This is page 121, top of the page here. Modernity conditions us to believe that in order to change reality or our ways of being, we first need to imagine what this change looks like, and then make a plan and act to achieve that goal. I skip down 3 lines. We will only be able to imagine something generally different if we first become suspicious of what we desire and are able to imagine within modernity. This is the first step toward hospicing modernity. In many ways, the only way out of the intellectual, affective, relational, and creative limits imposed by modernity is to intentionally pay more attention to modernity's death rather than try to fix, replace, or escape it. You know, like the example I said, like, okay, how is AI failing us? How is it failing us? Okay, maybe we can learn how to exist without AI by looking at the failure of AI, right? Right. But the book continues, this is not easy. Modernity has already restricted the parameters of what we can think, relate, imagine, and desire, and our intellect alone cannot interpret this in time. Modernity is faster than thought, that capitalist imaginary that I was talking about. This is why we cannot simply think our way out of modernity. Whatever we imagine when we are still invested in modernity will always only be different versions of modernity that secures the entitlements and enjoyments modernity affords us now. So thinking about, well, you know, maybe there's an ethical way of doing AI where it's like, maybe we shouldn't really be focusing on that to begin with. The obsession is like, okay, we just need to learn how to make AI work, as opposed to like, well, maybe AI just doesn't work. And so like, okay, smarty pants, what answers do you have? And you know, there's the temptation to be like, okay, let me figure out a solution to this problem. The book is arguing like, well, I don't know the answer. I just know, like, let's look at how AI is failing us, and then maybe based off of the failure, we can come up with something together. But it's not that. No, I mean, but that's hard to do, right? In the way we currently operate in society, because we're not conditioned to do that. Because these entitlements and enjoyments are based on violence and unsustainability, we are back to a circular pattern of systemic harm. Let's just roll, because AI is a good example. You know, AI creates a lot of environmental damage. It encourages people not to think deeply about things, right? It encourages people to take shortcuts, but it does give us instant information very quickly, very fast. It gives us quick answers to mundane problems. You know, you don't have to go to the library. You can just be like, hey, what's the capital of Ohio? I don't know that top of my head. Let me just ask AI. Oh, okay, it tells me right there. Or like something like that, right? As modernity, you know, the book argues, fast access to information, maybe that's like not a thing we should care so much about. Maybe we should just slow down. I don't know, and like that's gonna hamper our progress. You know, we gotta be able to think faster, where maybe the argument would be, well, do we really have to think faster? Like, is that really something that's important? You know, these are the things that we think about. These pleasures that we have, are they worth the damage that they're causing? In order to create the possibility for us to imagine something genuinely different, we first need to notice the harms we are causing and become dissatisfied with the things we enjoy that cause those harms, e.g. comfort, security, certainty. Only then might we begin to loosen the relational and affective restrictions modernity has imposed upon our being and learn to see, sense, and relate otherwise. However, it is extremely difficult to interpret the satisfactions we have with modernity's rewards, and it certainly does not happen overnight. Yeah, you know, the smartphone. I have a Razor, a Motorola Razor. It flips because I wanted to get back to go back to the when I had a Motorola Razor back in the early 2000s or whatever time that was. A smartphone gives us so much benefit. You know, we have a little small computer in our pockets, this mega computer. the access to like human knowledge instantly. But you know, when you think about it, like really, what do people use mostly for the smartphone for? It's not even like calling anymore. It's just like really, it's just doom scrolling. That's mostly what a smartphone is used for these days. Doom scrolling. Has it really? How much benefit has society, has the smartphone really given us? I mean, you know, it has given us benefit for sure, absolutely. But is it worth the doom scrolling? I'm old enough to, you know, be my boomer. I'm okay boomer moment. I remember when we didn't have mobile phones, and we just when I was a kid, we had the landlines. We just called. I had one of even those rotary phones. Now, I mean, that was just an old ass phone that we had in my house. But you know, we had a blast. That was fun too. I don't, you know, those times were good. I don't look back at the time when we had landlines and I didn't have a mobile phone and be like, damn, I wish if I had a mobile phone back then, those times would have been better. I don't say that. So, you know, I think that's what the book's talking about. Like, well, you know, are the benefits that you're receiving from our modern era, are they really, how much benefits are they really? And is the damage they cause worth it, really? You know, these are the questions we should be asking. Okay, page 125, second paragraph, third to the last line. This practice is about touching the known, the unknown, the unknowable. It is about our ability to dance with stories rather than holding them down with chains of fixed interpretation. I think that's important to mention here on the philosophy channel. That's all about like trying to give you answers. Whereas like, you know, this book says like, hey, that's a trap. That life doesn't have answers all the time. Sometimes you gotta live life without answers. And you gotta be okay with that. Or you gotta just learn to be able to live with that. But modernity has taken away our ability to live with that. Right? And I agree. Okay, this is page 142, the last line. A culture cannot expect to reverse overnight more than 2 centuries of elevating and rewarding one knowledge system over another while actively trying to destroy the other. Like, that's the thing, it's going to take a while. To hospice modernity, it's not going to happen quickly. And that's something we need to be okay with. Be okay with, like, hey, I'm in this for a long run. I do, like, I'm an abolitionist, so I believe that the world would be better with if police didn't exist or prisons didn't exist. But I mean, that's not going to happen within my lifetime. I understand that. I get it. Like, and I'm okay with that. But I'm going to do my ripple, my little drop in the bucket that spreads. I'm going to try and do what I can, knowing that, I mean, hey, hopefully that makes a difference and maybe get some more people involved in that way of thinking and helping people think outside the framework of modernity, right? But we need to be okay with that. I can't just go into this psychological crisis of, oh no, it's been a year and the police are still here. In fact, they're sending the National Guard. Damn, what am I doing? It's like, well, it's not gonna happen overnight, right? But you still need to be, you gotta be like mature, which is what the book is when arguing is like, don't, you know, try not to de-evolve in like the infant stage. Just kind of be more mature about it and say like, yeah, no, I mean, you know, we've lived in a society where propaganda is a thing. Like every other television show is a cop show. People believe cops are the answers to everything. You know, that's a hard ask for society. And that's something I need to be okay with while still trying to do my part to contribute toward abolition. Okay, this is second paragraph, page 143, third line. Even if we remain committed to this work, it would take generations for these to be renegotiated and recalibrated in order for different knowledge systems to work together on a level playing field. In addition, this work is not easy because it is one thing to say that you are interested in reconciliation and already open to taking steps in that direction. It is another to actually do the difficult and uncomfortable work necessary for reconciliation to become a flicker of a possibility including disinvesting from arrogance, right? Right? I think, that's I'm an abolitionist. Okay, so, when something bad happens, you're not going to call the cops, right? You're not, if somebody's actually stealing something from your front lawn, you're going to call a cop, because if you're an abolitionist, you're not going to do that, right? So what are well, no, I'm still going to call it, see, that's why it's hard, right? Or such and such other example, right? It takes a while, right? The author's just acknowledging that, which you got to say, you got to let people know. I'll continue a few more quotes about how we should be approaching modernity according to this book. This is page 165, second paragraph. We need to see all human knowledge as limited, culturally bound, and equivocal. This requires noticing that the desire for certainty for all-encompassing knowledge is in the same harmful cluster of the desires to conquer, consume, and control that have created the colossal mess driving us toward human extinction. We recognize that we don't know everything. We cannot know everything. We are not a special species, and there is a biointelligence in the living planet metabolism itself that is much older and larger than what human intelligence can fathom. We will need to clear out the things that have cluttered our existence in modernity so that this biointelligence can begin to work through us in more profound ways, through the gifts and medicines we carry. I'm down with it. Just acknowledging that, there are intelligence that are beyond us. We say IQ, that's human, and that's like the end all be all intelligence. But, of course, there's plenty of intelligence that go on in trees, for instance, or plant life, or like animal life that we can't even begin to understand. And maybe we never will, and that's cool too. But we don't have to understand something to relate with it, right? To have a relationship with it that's positive. That's the thing. That's a very important thing. You don't have to understand something to have a positive relationship with it. Okay? That by modernity tells you, no, to have a good relationship with somebody, you have to be able to understand them. Right? And that's a trap that modernity has put us in. Let me conclude with a large block of text here on page 235. Consumption of marginalized knowledge is driven by the search for answers, for how to either reform modernity or build a prefabricated alternative to it. When this happens, it will be very tempting to feel that finally the oppressors will be proven wrong because our knowledge is right and we know it all along. However, customers will only buy what is convenient and what comes cheap without major efforts or substantial changes. Genuine teachings will be distorted by this market for both sellers and customers, and the truth in it will be dissolved without people even noticing it. A lot of time and energy will be wasted there. Beyond the fact that these marginalized knowledges will be selectively consumed, it is also important to note that not everything at the margins offers something new or generative. Okay. All right. Again, this is bringing it back your philosophy or your ideology isn't necessarily the ultimate one, even if it's a left or right one. Both sides fall into this trap. Before anything different can happen, before people can sense, hear, relate, and imagine differently, there must be a clearing, a decluttering, and initiation into the unknowable, and a letting go of the desires for certainty, authority, hierarchy, and of insatiable consumption as a mode of relating to everything. We will need a genuine severance that will shatter all projections, anticipations, hopes, and expectations in order to find something we lost about ourselves, about time, space, about the depth of the shit we are in, about the medicines, poisons we carry. This is about pain, about death, about finding a compass and antidote to separability. This is about being ready to go, to befriend death, before we are ready to return home and to live as grown-ups. I'll just keep going here. But this is not easy because modernity has programmed us not to choose this direction. Even once we decide we want change, we are conditioned to want change to happen quickly and on our own terms. generally terms that do not jeopardize our perceived entitlements, securities, and self-images. In this context, our visions of change are based on simplistic analysis and solutions, paternalistic relations with marginalized communities, and ethnocentric ideals of justice, sustainability, and change. We underestimate the depth and complexity of problems, and we overestimate the information, policies, protocols, and enthusiasm can do. We also miscalculate the gap between where we are at and where we would like to be, and what we would need to relinquish to get there. We tend to project and universalize our expectations of means, outcomes, and outputs, and when different expectations clash, we get upset and frustrated. We do not have the stamina or resilience to keep going when the going gets tough. Basically, that quote said it all. I mean, I'm in alignment with that, or in agreement with that one. Let me read page 237, the last paragraph here. This is a difference between divesting from modernity and disinvesting from it. Divestment means that in order to avoid being implicated in the harms of modernity, you turn your back to modernity and attempt to exit from it. Divestment is practically impossible, and to the extent that it is a viable option for people, it is usually only those who are systemically advantaged by modernity, and those have the choices and resources to seemingly opt out of certain dimensions of the modern society. You know, people who like live off the grid or like van life or something like that. You know, those people are generally privileged already, right, by modernity. And that's how they're able to do that. So in a way, their modernity is enabling them to live that life. So they say they live off the grid, but they can only live off the grid because the grid is enabling them to live off the grid, right? Compared to divestment, which seeks to transcend modernity without giving up any of its promises, disinvestment means we do not invest in the future of modernity while staying with modernity's troubles, facing our responsibilities, and gradually developing discernment to reorient our desires away from modernity's violence and unsustainability without resorting to heroism or escapism. So yeah, we're in this shit together. We're not really getting out of it. We just have to like let the shit just be shit and just kind of decompose around us. You know, help do the cleanup. Make it, you know, maybe turn it into a compost, you know, and like try and grow something better out of it, you know, hospice it. It is what it is. It's kind of like, you know, me with my relationship with YouTube, for example. Like I know YouTube is just, you know, it's owned by Google. You know, they used to say do no evil, but they got rid of that logo because they do evil, right? You know, which is, I think, apparent is a subsidiary of Alphabet, another company or whatever. I don't know. But, you know, I've tried to be like, well, you know, I'm not going to monetize my videos because fuck that, because, you know, I'm not going to be a slave to the algorithm. And so, you know, I only get so many views also, but, you know, let's not pretend like my production value is not not a part of that, where like I said at the beginning, bad lighting, right? Not good sound. You know, I admit that, hey, I'm living in it. But I'm gonna be me. I'm gonna be me. I'm gonna do my thing. I'm not gonna be a slave to it, but at the same time, I'm gonna reap some of the benefits of it, but acknowledge my complicity in it. It's rough. It really is living in a society like this, trying to do good. And, you know, I think this is a good book for you to, if you're also struggling with that. Like, man, you know, this society, you know, it benefits off of the sufferings of others, and my comforts and advantages in life are the result of society's exploitations of other people. How do you deal with that? Well, this book kind of helps you deal with it. It doesn't give you answers like, okay, I have the perfect system for modernity. You know, don't do modernity, do this instead. No, the book doesn't do that, which is why this is a hard book to swallow. It doesn't give you answers, but it does help you deal with the reality that our modern way of living is destroying us. Despite the benefits that it gives us, it is destroying us. And it gets you in a mode of like, okay, now that I've accepted that, I'm past the denial phase. Now it's time for me to do this, which is up to you to determine, not the book. The book is like not giving you the answers to that. The book is just getting you primed and ready to get into that mode of like, all right, here's how I'm gonna like, live with modernity and transcend beyond it, right? So it's a good book, and I just want to thank the viewer again who gave it to me, who's, you know, not just a viewer, but a good friend. And I encourage, like, there's a lot of people who say, hey, Black Ponderer, can you read this and talk about it? And it's like, man, I have gotten well over 100 or probably more recommendations from people. I have a long list. But if you give me some, send me a physical copy, right? Because I admit I love physical books. It's a modernity thing. I'm sorry. I'm a bibliophile. I'll bump it up. I'll be like, okay, I'll read it. So, feel free to do that. Some people give me digital copies. That gives it a little higher, but not as high as a physical book. Anyway, all that to say, this is a great book. I would recommend it. The author does say, like, hey, you might not be ready because it's giving you some hard truths. And so I would also say, like, maybe go to the book store and kind of look over it, or like maybe look at a preview and be like, am I ready for this? It's also got lots of exercises in it. It's a kind of a self-help book too. And I would say, like, to get the most of what the book has to offer, you probably should do the exercises, not just kind of read over and be like, okay, I skip. Like, then you're missing out on a lot of what the book has to offer. So it'll take you a while to get through it. But if you are down for the journey, it's gonna be a good experience overall, I would say. Well, you've been watching The Black Ponderer. Tune in next time for more philosophical thought.